10 years, I thought I was done with boxing. I'd become a full-time minister at the Church of the Lord Jesus Christ. That's all I knew was preaching. I didn't think I'd box again. But yet, I started teaching kids never a punch in anger. I taught them and learned myself that I could be a good professional boxer without anger. And the movie tells that story. I was able to go back out there without anger.
Big George Foreman comes out on April 28th. So how excited are you to have this film finally come out and everyone see your story?
It's a good story, but I tell you, that Khris Davis, the actor who played George Foreman, had me pulling for George Foreman. He really could act, and it brought out the features when what I was afraid of. I was this muscular guy.
Yeah.
And then when I came back, I was this guy who had consumed every McDonald's and Jack in the Box in the world, but I still had to go out and do it without didn't have any excuses. That's what the movie was for me, a realization of what I had done, and it makes you think it was a miracle.
Absolutely. And you're an executive producer on the film. Could you talk a little bit about your role when it comes to production? Were you on set every day?
Not on set, but the script. That's what you had to fight about. Hollywood wanted to be Hollywood, and I wanted to be George Foreman.
Exactly.
And you realize you got to mix a lot of Hollywood if you're going to tell a good story. And they did make a good story, and I didn't understand it until I saw it on film. The art of the pictures, not words, but the art of the screen really made the movie come alive.
It did. And you mentioned Khris Davis, and you're right, he was incredible in this film, and he had to go through so many transformations. So what was your reaction when you saw him, as your younger self and then in your older self?
Oh boy, the really part, he's under the house like I was, hiding from the dogs to make sure they wouldn't smell me under the house, and covering himself with slime and sewage. Boy, I relived that moment. That was the police had gotten me that time for out there being a mugger. Life wouldn't be like it is today. That Khris Davis, he brought those pieces together for me and made me relive them fine.
And one of the things I liked about the movie is the first half, the first hour, is all about your rise to the top and your childhood as well. And then the second half is pretty much your comeback, you being a minister, and essentially it's kind of like two different movies. But when you look at the second half of the film and your comeback, were you nervous at all to return to the ring after 10 years?
10 years, I thought I was done with boxing. I'd become a full-time minister at the Church of the Lord Jesus Christ. That's all I knew was preaching. I didn't think I'd box again, but yet I started teaching kids never a punch in anger. I taught them and learned myself that I could be a good professional boxer without anger. And the movie tells that story. I was able to go back out there without anger.
And obviously, this film highlights some of your most memorable moments in your boxing career. Is there one moment that stands out more than anyone else or any other moment?
So many moments that as a young boy, I'm going through, my mom was moving through these houses. We were always moving. And I saw this rusty refrigerator and stove. People would move out of these places and they'd leave these refrigerators only because they didn't work. And I revisited those moments in that movie and I cried. Because you realize it doesn't matter where you are today, there's always, if you want it to be a better tomorrow.
Of course, and this movie touches on the George Foreman grill. You sold that company in 1999. I have one. I actually need to get another one. But are you surprised how much success the George Foreman grill has had over these years?
Yeah, I sold that grill way back for a lot of money, and then years later I tried to buy it back, and it was in the billions then, and I realized it was something I couldn't afford. So the grill was a success story by itself.
Absolutely. One last question for me. George Foreman is all about redemption, getting that second chance. So what do you want fans to take away from this movie when they see it?
Yeah, the movie is not even about me per se. Yeah. It's about anyone. Doesn't matter how far you are on the bottom, how far you have to come, you can make it if you just don't give up on yourself. And there are a lot of people who will back you up. If you believe in yourself, there's a lot of help. People will help you go that extra mile. And that's what they can take from the movie. Just don't give up.
Absolutely. Well, George, again, I love the movie. I know everyone else will love it. Thank you so much for your time. I do appreciate it, and continued success to you.
Thank you so much.
Big George Foreman comes out on April 28th. So what can fans expect from this George Foreman biopic?
To learn an incredible scope of Mr. Foreman's life. I think that they're going to be surprised at what they thought they knew about him and what they learn about him. So they should expect an interesting and insightful ride.
Now, you play the title character. Overall, how was the experience playing a boxing legend?
Oh man, it was intense. It was intense. There's a lot of pressure there. There's a lot of pressure there, you know, and not only a boxing legend who had never been portrayed before, you know, so there was no reference to really draw from aside from the footage of him doing interviews and watching his fights and things like that. I felt the pressure initially, but the pressures, you know, evolved into responsibility. So I knew I had a responsibility to do the best that I possibly could do, and that's all I really wanted to do was my absolute best. That's it.
So did you know a lot about George Foreman before landing the role?
Not a lot. I mean, I knew who he was. I knew, you know, that he had fought Ali. I knew that he was the grill guy, but I didn't know about his fight history like that. I didn't know I didn't even know he had a second comeback. How about that? Yeah. You know, and I definitely didn't know that he was a religious man.
Absolutely. And one of the things about the film is you see George Foreman start, and when it comes to his boxing career, start at 250 pounds. Then when he makes that comeback, he's a lot bigger at 315 pounds. So how challenging was it for you to put on those extra pounds for the film?
Oh man, when I think about it, you know, I had gone through so many physical challenges before, just doing the first half of the film, getting into fight shape, switching my body weight per week based off of what we were filming that week. So my body was already going through a lot of rigorous changes. So when I stepped into gaining the weight, I was prepared for some pain. I was prepared for a lot of drastic changes. My body had changed tremendously to get in shape in the first place. So, but what I will say is eating 7,000 calories a day is nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
And gaining 50 pounds in 5 weeks is nothing to sneeze at. So, you know, I went from 225 to 275 in 5 weeks, and it was hard. You know, I was seeing myself change, and it started to make me feel sad and depressed and confused. But then I went to the mirror and I shaved all my hair off to a baldy, and I shaved my beard off. I took my shirt off, and I was like, oh, there you are. There it is, you know? Yeah, so I felt much better, and I felt like we were on the right track. So me doing that and seeing myself that way, seeing my body transform into Mr. Foreman because of all the calories I was eating, gave me hope and faith that I was on the right track.
And along with that, there's also the boxing aspect. Yeah. There's a lot of intense boxing scenes. So how was training for that when it comes to the boxing matches?
The training was rigorous. As I said before, we would be in the gym for 5 to 6 hours a day, sometimes as early as 3 or 4 a.m. After that, I would come home, I would eat, get my nutrition in, and then I would be in the gym for another 2 hours. Before heading back upstairs and opening my script and reading and looking at film on Mr. Foreman. We sparred. We treated it like a fight camp. You know, yeah. Coach Daryl Foster was like, look, we're not training for a movie. We're going to train as if you are training for a heavyweight title fight. And that's the way we treated it.
Absolutely. And this film has such a talented cast led by Forrest Whitaker, who plays Doc Brodus. How was it working with Forrest?
Working with Forrest was incredible. I mean, you know, he's the kind of actor that you hope you get to work with at least once in your life, because he's had such a wide scope of work, such range, that just watching him do his thing for a matter of seconds changed the way that I saw myself going on this journey to tell Big George Foreman. He didn't have to say a word to me. I just saw the way he was moving, Mr. Whitaker, how he handled the camera, how he handled his moments, and that really helped me along the way.
And do you feel like this movie is kind of kind of like two movies, because the first half, it talks about George Foreman's rise to boxing, and then the second half, the second hour, is his comeback and, you know, all the changes that he's made over the years. Do you feel like it's kind of two movies all into one?
Well, kind of feels that way.
Yeah.
Kind of feels that way, but that was his life. Yeah. That's most of our lives, right? Sometimes you look back and you're like, you think about that 17-year-old, that 20-year-old version of yourself, and you're like, who was that? I don't know who that person is, right? You wouldn't hang out with the 20-year-old you when you think about it. You know what I mean? It's a whole different life you're living. So yeah, I think it does feel like that.
It really does. So you talk about the challenges when it comes to playing George Foreman, putting on the weight, going through the boxing training, and you know, also learning the script. So overall, what was the best thing about portraying George Foreman?
The best thing about portraying George Foreman was having the privilege of being able to uplift and uphold part of his legacy, man. You know, Mr. Foreman, and even while filming, I think we all kind of had to kind of snap out of it and be like, man, he is really big, like he's important when you think about it. So having the opportunity to be the individual who gets to tell his story on this magnitude for the first time, that's it. That's it right there. And if that's all I have to walk away from all this with, I feel blessed for it.
And last question for me is, you know, Big George Foreman is all about redemption, getting that second chance, along with telling George Foreman's story. So what do you want fans to take away from this film when they start watching on April 28th?
Look, there's a lot of nuances in this film. There's a lot of challenges that Mr. Foreman went through, and there's a lot of challenges that we go through in our own personal lives. So when people are watching this film and they see the miraculous things that Mr. Foreman actually had to work through, the things he had to overcome, I hope that whatever they see, whatever they take away, that it gives them some hope, it gives them some faith, and I hope that what they take away, and I think the film's overall, one of the overall themes of the film is the second chances, right? That second chances are a privilege, you know, and we shouldn't take them for granted.
Absolutely. Well, Khris, again, I enjoyed the film. I enjoyed your portrayal as George Foreman, and I know everyone else will. Thank you so much for your time. I do appreciate it, and continued success to you.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you this first. Big George Foreman comes out in theaters on April 28th, and you've done your share of just different movies in your career. Ultimately, what made you want to work on this project?
Yeah, I wanted to work on this film, man, because the story's just, you can't make this up, man. This is a real true story of a young man who was written off at an early age, becoming a heavyweight champion, and then losing it, and then winning it 20 years later after changing who he was and having a second chance in life. And along the ride, man, the roller coaster ride of life, and there's so many ups and downs, and listening to George tell his story, I was on the edge of my seat, and that's what I felt like I wanted the audience to feel when they watched the movie as well.
Absolutely. And one of the things that stood out in this movie is obviously Khris Davis's portrayal as George Foreman, but also Sullivan Jones's portrayal as Muhammad Ali, and you know, those two working together. So how is it working with those two and seeing them in action?
Yo, that was a really great process for me, because I started off with those two. You know, we did auditions for George and Ali almost around the same time. So when I finally narrowed them down, let's put them in a room. This was during the pandemic. It was only through Zoom I was doing these auditions. So they flew out to LA and we put them in the room together. And right then I knew I was looking at the two guys that played this role. They were both dedicated just to get that fight, the choreography of the Ali fight. You know, hit from hit, move to move was very difficult, and their commitment was awesome.
And with this film, the first hour talks about, you know, George's early days, his childhood, his rise to the top. And then once that second hour hits, it talks about the second half of his career, being a minister, going back into the ring, and, you know, beating Michael Moore to win the title for the second time. Did you feel like this movie was kind of split into two films?
Yeah, I always felt that way, because George was split into two individuals. It's like he completely changed after the Jimmy Young and experience. And that's something that George felt like we really had to get right, what he experienced in that locker room. Because after he got out of that locker room, it was no more boxing. And as a filmmaker, I was like, wow, your impressions, the way you see things, the way you experience life is going to feel different, it's going to look different. And as a director, I try to give the audience that subjective point of view of what it's like to walk away and having a brightness in your life. But at any time, can that come back? Can that old anger come back? And George was able to hold that down and continue on with his life. And that's how I wanted to have people experience the film.
And when people watch this film on April 28th, there's going to be fans who know all about George Foreman in terms of his boxing career. Then there's going to be another generation of fans who just know George Foreman from being the grill guy, being the founder of George Foreman Grill. Ultimately, what do you want fans to take away from this film when they start watching it on April 28th?
I think what you can take away is that anything is possible, right? Like George says it, he's like, the grill, whoever expected the grill to be that successful, right? Whoever expected a 46-year-old man to win the championship belt, you know, after 20 years later. Those are the certain things that as an audience, you know, as a director, I want the audience to walk away first being entertained and seeing the roller coaster ride, but then to walk away with something inspiring.
Well, George, I have to say I enjoyed the film. I think everyone did a great job on it. Thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it, and continued success to you.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Big George Foreman hits theaters on April 28th. You played Doc Brodus in the film. But ultimately, what drew you to the character and the movie?
I mean, I think the character gets to explore what it means to help mentor somebody and be a champion, and when his own dreams are interfering, how to get them out, how to move them out of the way. I think that kind of was interesting territory for me to play. I played a boxing coach before. This one was different journey.
Absolutely. And, you know, in the film, George Foreman, you know, he has two successful boxing careers, you know, one when he was just relatively young, and then the other when he was 45 years old. And that's all displayed in the film. While filming, did you learn something new about George Foreman that you didn't know before?
I mean, honestly, I didn't realize that. I knew he was coming from poor beginnings, but I didn't realize how impoverished his family was. And I think that I didn't realize that he had this revelatory moment, near-death experience. I didn't know. I learned that from the film. And that experience helped him move into his spiritual life as a preacher, and I didn't know that.
Absolutely, I didn't know that either. And in the film, you got to work closely with Khris Davis, who plays George Foreman in the movie. How impressed were you with his portrayal as well as his work to transform his body?
I mean, when I first came in, he'd already been a character, and he was really committed, and you could tell by his speech, by his movement, he was carrying that with him. And then, you know, when he went away to get because he had spent I guess a year or so just learning how to box, and you could tell it. You could tell it by watching him in the ring when he was fighting with other people. He looked like a real fighter, and yeah, I mean, then later you see him commit to gaining all that weight, which is so much that you it almost looks like it's a prosthetic, you know, but it's not. It's real, and that takes a great commitment.
It really does. And, you know, this film is all about redemption and getting a second chance. But ultimately, what do you want fans to take away from this film when they watch it starting on April 28th?
I just want them to know that if they have faith, they can believe, they can make things happen, that it's possible. It's possible.
Of course. You're absolutely right about that. Well, Forrest, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. Again, congratulations on the movie and continued success to you.
Thanks.
Big George Foreman premieres in theaters on April 28th. How would you best describe this film about George Foreman?
So it's a story about a man who, not by chance, stumbled into the world of boxing, did some amazing things, lost it all, found God, and then came back and with God did the miraculous, right? It's a story about how your dreams are connected to your purpose. And when you embrace God, he can just turn your dreams into miracles.
Absolutely. You play Mary Joan, George Foreman's wife in the movie. Yeah. And how was the experience playing a figure that was so important to George Foreman's career and life?
It was a tall task.
Yeah.
I won't lie, because I really wanted to honor the integrity of who Mary Joan was to Mr. Foreman, and just her as a human being, right? She wasn't just his wife. She was a spiritual guide to him. She was a disciplinarian when she needed to be. She was a nurturer. So I really took the time to try and understand what her inner conflicts were with him going back to the boxing world. You know, her family was one of the most important things to her. Yeah. And the thought of losing it all potentially with him going back to boxing was frightening. So really understanding that inner conflict, really grasping the accent of Mary Joan, because she is from Monrepo, St. Lucia, and not having her at my side to kind of guide me, because she is a very private person, which I totally understand. Really had to use my own imagination, as well as some of the facts that I got, was able to pull off of the internet to really like hone in on this character and understand her to be a complex human being. It was cool. It was cool.
Nice. Well, in this film, and you talked about it a little bit, this film focuses on George Foreman's life, where the first half is all about his rise to fame, rise in the boxing world, getting that heavyweight championship, and then losing it to Muhammad Ali. And then the second half is, you know, him finding God and then coming back to the boxing world to win the championship again at 45 years old. So what did you know about George Foreman and his family before taking this role?
I knew all of his sons were named George. Yeah. I knew. I didn't understand why, though. So I was really just in awe of like why he actually did that. And I won't give a spoiler alert. You'll learn about it in the film. But I knew that. I knew about George Foreman and the grill, of course. I knew he was a 2-time heavyweight champion, and I knew he was from Houston, which I'm from Houston as well. So I was really hype about that. But that's about all I knew.
Yeah, it's funny because when I was growing up, I remember the second half of George Foreman's career where, you know, he came back when he was older, and I didn't really know about, you know, the first half during his younger days and him taking 10 years off of the boxing world. So it was pretty interesting to see, you know, the first half of the film and, you know, how he became a boxer and how quickly he was able to rise in the boxing world. So I thought that was great to see. But Khris Davis plays George Foreman in the movie. And you got to work with him when he was in the second half, and George Foreman's second half of his boxing career and life. So how was it working with Khris, who had to work hard to put on those pounds because, you know, George Foreman gained so much weight? So how was it working with Khris?
Khris, I will say this, is a superstar. I've never worked with someone so dedicated to the story itself. And he brought such an intensity and such a play to everything and such nuanced work. It was truly an honor. I felt like I was just watching the master at work and really playing off of him. And he gives a lot. He cared, and he was a great leader of this ship for us. And I did admittedly go sneak in and see some of the boxing scenes that they were filming. Yeah. And when I tell you they were really throwing blows, like they were really getting hit. So what you see in those boxing matches is real, is hard work. And I was shocked when I came back the second half and saw that he had put on like 60 pounds in 5 weeks. It was
5 weeks. Yeah.
Astonishing. He's the real deal though. And I really loved working with him.
Of course. And, you know, going back to Mary Joan, she's obviously a big support system for George Foreman. What did you like most about playing her in the movie?
I loved the thing about Mary Joan is I kind of saw her as like two things, right? Sort of like the Mother Mary figure, very nurturing, very matronly, but also she has this like fierce Joan of Arc side. So I like dabbling back and forth between those two. I also had a really great time just bringing in the love and playfulness of the Foreman family. She and George Foreman have a very cute, sort of innocent and childlike relationship. And that was a great time to be able to do that with Khris Davis.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And, you know, I'm from Atlanta. I got a chance to meet George Foreman when he was here a couple of weeks
Wonderful.
ago, and I'm just really impressed with him. I'm really impressed how he looks at 74, 75 years old. So did you get a chance to meet George Foreman? And if so, what were your impressions of him?
I did. He's such a sweet man. I met him while we were filming. He
Yeah.
came to New Orleans, and he has such like a loving and warm energy about him. It was kind of hard to believe that he was as, vicious as he was as a boxer back in the
Yeah.
day. I was like, are we sure this is the right person? But he was a very kind and warm spirit, and he allowed me to ask him some questions about Mary Joan that helped inform me on the character as well.
That's great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And along with your work on Big George Foreman, you're set to appear in a independent movie called All the Lost Ones. So what can you tell us about this upcoming film?
Get ready for the ride.
Yeah.
That was a film that really pushed me as an artist and as a human being to dig as deep as I could with the tools that I have, the life that I've lived. It's a sort of post-apocalyptic Civil War action film, and it's intense. It's intense. It's what would happen in this country if I'm trying not to give it away. It's story. It's not too far from what could happen in this country.
I'm looking forward to that. Can't wait till that comes out. And I first remember you from the film, the Prime Video film, The Tomorrow War, which had a pretty big cast. It was a big movie, had a lot of action. So what was the biggest takeaway from starring in a movie like that?
I can do it.
Yeah.
I am more than equipped, and I have it in me, and I have what it takes to do the things that God has put on my heart to do. And working with Chris Pratt, I really admired him because he was able to kind of like joke around while we weren't filming, and then once they call action, he'd go right into it. And one thing that he did tell me was, I asked him, how do you do that? How do you walk away every day after doing such heavy material and your smiles and giggles? And he said, I don't take it home with me. And I really appreciated that. So after that, what I started doing is I create an imaginary line. When I walk on set and I cross over that threshold, it's work, it's the character. When I leave it all there, and I'm able to come back into Jasmine. So that's something that I really took away that has stuck with me.
I love that. That's so awesome. And then one last question for me before I let you go is, it seems like you're staying busy, but are there other projects out there that you're working on that you can talk about?
No, not at the moment. But stay tuned for sure. In the future, what I can talk about is what I would like to do. Love to get into some more action films. Put my black belt to use. I have a black belt in Shotokan karate.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'd love to be able to get into that world and do some really cool action scenes.
Down the road, would you like to do any producing or directing?
I would love to produce. I got a lot of stories in my head that I would love to tell, that I think can really show humanity what could be, and sort of change the narrative of how we see the world and the perspective. So definitely producing in my future.
Love to hear it. Well, Jasmine, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it, and continued success to you.